The morning they released me, the sky was the color of old bone. Gray, flat, the kind of sky that doesn't promise anything. I stood at the entrance of Elmwood Correctional Facility in upstate New York and took the first breath of free air I'd had in 26 months. It smelled like diesel and wet concrete and something faintly like pine from the tree line far off to the north. I didn't cry. I'd used up my tears a long time ago. A corrections officer named Briggs, the younger one, the one who used to slide a paperback under my cell door when he thought nobody was watching, held the door open a few seconds longer than he needed to. He didn't say anything. He just nodded, the kind of nod that means I know what happened to you wasn't right. I nodded back and walked out. My son was not there to pick me up. I hadn't expected him to be. There's a moment, early in all of this, that I keep coming back to. Not the arrest, not the handcuffs, not the judge reading the verdict in that flat, bored voice like he was reading a grocery list. The moment I keep returning to is earlier than all of that. It was a Tuesday evening in October, 2.5 years ago. I was sitting at the kitchen table in the house I'd owned for 31 years, going through paperwork, quarterly statements, nothing unusual. My son, I'll call him my son because that is what he is, biologically, legally, and in every way that used to matter, walked in with his wife, Sienna. She was holding a manila folder against her chest. She set it on a table in front of me. I looked at it. Then I looked at her. "What is this?" I asked. My son sat down across from me. He didn't meet my eyes. That was the first sign, and I missed it, the way you miss things when you spend 63 years trusting someone. "Dad," he said, "we need to talk about what you did." I didn't understand the words. They were English. Arranged in a sentence I recognized grammatically, but they didn't make sense to me sitting there in my own kitchen with the same clock on the wall that had been ticking since 1991. What I had done. Let me back up. Let me tell you who I was before any of this happened, because I think it matters. My name is Robert Calloway. I was born in Dayton, Ohio in 1962. My father worked at a GM plant, and my mother taught 3rd grade. And the lesson they drove into me from the time I was old enough to understand it was this: you build something with your hands and your mind, and nobody can take it from you. I believed that. For 40 years, I believed it completely. I spent my career in commercial real estate, not the glamorous kind, not Manhattan penthouses or celebrity developments. The unglamorous kind, strip malls in the Midwest, warehouse conversions in mid-sized cities, a portfolio of small apartment complexes across 4 states that I'd assembled one property at a time over 3 decades. By the time I was in my early 60s, I wasn't rich the way people on television are rich, but I was comfortable. I had assets. I had a company, Calloway Property Group, that I'd registered in Delaware in 1998. I had a reputation. I had a rutch. I had a son who, I believed, was going to inherit all of it. My son's name is Daniel. He came into the business in his early 30s. I gave him a real title, VP of Acquisitions, and real responsibility. He was smart enough. Maybe not as driven as I'd been, but he knew the business. He had a good eye for property. We worked well together for almost 8 years. And during those years, I started stepping back, handing things off, preparing for the transition the way you're supposed to. Then Daniel met Sienna. I want to be careful here, because I spent a long time being angry at her, and I'm trying to get past that. What I'll say is this: Sienna was 31 when she and Daniel got married. She was charming in the way that people are charming when they're working at it. She laughed at the right moments. She remembered things about you. Your birthday, a story you'd told once, what kind of whiskey you liked. People liked her immediately. I liked her immediately. My wife, Daniel's mother, had passed 4 years before the wedding. Pancreatic cancer. 8 weeks from diagnosis to the end. I don't have words for that loss, not even now, so I won't try. What I'll say is that after Catherine died, I was not at my most vigilant. I was a man with a hole in the middle of him, going through the motions of running a business and pretending to be fine. When Sienna came along and seemed to fill some of that space, seemed to bring warmth back into the family, I was grateful. I lowered my guard. That was my mistake. I don't know exactly when Sienna started steering Daniel away from me. I've tried to reconstruct the timeline and I can't get it right because it happened slowly, the way these things do. First, it was small things. Daniel stopped calling to check in as often. Decisions that used to be made together started being made without me. When I raised concerns in meetings, Daniel would look at Sienna instead of answering me directly. She would smile and say something smooth, and the conversation would move on. By the spring of the year, it all fell apart. I had started to realize something was wrong with the company finances. I'm not an accountant, but I know how to read a balance sheet, and some numbers weren't matching what I expected. I brought it up to Daniel. He told me I was being paranoid. He told me I was being older, and maybe I didn't understand the current market. Those words, "You're getting older, you don't understand." I felt them in a particular way that I think other men my age will recognize. I hired an outside accountant to look at the books. His name was Phil Garrett. Phil had done work for me on and off for years. I trusted him. He spent 2 weeks going through everything, and then he called me on a Friday afternoon and said very carefully, "Robert, I think you should get a lawyer before we talk about what I found." I never got to that conversation. The following Monday morning, 2 detectives from the county sheriff's office appeared at my door. The allegation, which Daniel and Sienna had filed, was that I had improperly transferred company assets into a personal account, embezzlement, essentially, from my own company, to the sum of approximately $340,000. They had bank records. They had transfer documents with my signature. I told the detectives the documents were forged. They arrested me anyway. I'm not going to walk you through the legal details because, honestly, they still make me so angry I can't think clearly. What I'll tell you is that I could not immediately make bail. The amount was set at a level that required liquidating assets, and those assets were frozen as part of the investigation. I had a lawyer, a man named Jeffrey Price, who charged $400 an hour, and who I believe was adequate but not exceptional. I sat in county jail for 6 weeks before we managed to get my bail arrangement modified. Then I was under house arrest at a rental property for nearly a year, while the case dragged through continuances and motions. Ultimately, I was convicted on 1 count of financial fraud and sentenced to 30 months with credit for time served. I was 64 years old. I had never had so much as a speeding ticket. The thing people don't understand about prison, and I say this not to complain but because it's the truth, is the noise. It never stops. There's always something happening, always sound, day and night, metal on metal and voices and the PA system and footsteps. The first 3 weeks I didn't sleep more than 2 hours at a stretch. I lost 16 pounds. I sat on my bunk in the evening and tried to remember what my house looked like. The specific yellow of the light in the kitchen in the late afternoon, and I couldn't always get it. But here is the thing about time. It doesn't stop for you. It doesn't slow down out of sympathy. It keeps moving, and eventually you start moving with it. About 4 months in, I requested a meeting with the facility's legal aid coordinator. Her name was Miss Fontaine, and she was patient with me in a way that I'll never forget. I told her I needed help understanding what documents I could request, what access I had to records relating to my case. She explained my options clearly. She helped me file the right requests. The transfer documents that had convicted me had my signature. I knew they were forged, but proving it was harder than you'd think. Digital forensics on financial documents is complicated, and my trial lawyer had not pushed hard enough on this particular thread, but the account they claimed I'd transferred money to. That was the thread I kept pulling. The account had been opened in my name, but I'd been out of the country when it was opened. I was in Tampa for a commercial real estate conference. I had my conference registration. I had hotel receipts in my name from a Marriott on Bayshore Boulevard. I had 2 people who remembered seeing me there. This was documented. My lawyer had mentioned it, but he hadn't pressed it the way it deserved to be pressed. More importantly, Phil Garrett had never gotten to tell me what he found before my arrest. I got a letter out to him, to a family friend. I cut off all contact with Daniel and Sienna, and I didn't want anyone close to me to be harassed. And Phil, God bless him, had kept his notes. He'd kept everything. What he'd found was a pattern of transfers predating the ones they accused me of, going back nearly 2 years. Smaller amounts. Consistent timing. The kind of thing you miss if you're not looking for it, but obvious once you know where to look. Daniel and Sienna had been siphoning money from Callaway Property Group long before they decided to pin it on me. There was one more piece. A year into my sentence, I got word through my lawyer. I'd switched to a different attorney by then, a woman named Susan Marsh in Cleveland who specialized in financial fraud appeals, that Sienna had filed for divorce. Daniel was apparently involved with someone new. The marriage that had cost me 26 months of my life was falling apart over an affair. People asked me if that made me feel better. It didn't. It just made me feel tired. What made me feel better was the affidavit. I had been careful in the years before my conviction in ways I didn't fully realize at the time. I had a habit, left over from 30 years in real estate, of keeping originals, not copies, originals. Paper, whenever possible. Contracts with original ink signatures, correspondence that I'd printed and filed. I kept these in a fireproof safe in my office, and when the arrest happened, the safe had been overlooked. It was built into the wall behind a panel that looked like part of the shelving. Nobody took it. Among the documents in that safe, a letter of intent dated 8 months before my arrest for the sale of Callaway Property Group to a regional real estate investment trust out of Columbus. Daniel had negotiated the deal without telling me, without my knowledge or consent, because as majority owner I would have had to approve it. He'd been trying to sell my company out from under me. When I'd gotten too close to discovering what was going on, when I'd hired Phil, they'd had to move faster than planned. The criminal charges against me were the plan. Get me out of the way, get me discredited, get me convicted, then complete the sale as the remaining principals of the company. My appeal, Susan filed it in my second year, was built on 3 things: the alibi evidence that had been inadequately presented at trial, Phil's financial analysis showing the pre-existing pattern of fraud, and the letter of intent that demonstrated motive, not just that Daniel and Sienna had opportunity to forge documents, but that they had a specific, documented reason to need me gone. The appeal was granted 8 months after it was filed. My conviction was vacated. I walked out of Elmwood on a gray Tuesday morning in April. I want to tell you what the drive home felt like, but the honest answer is I don't fully remember it. My friend Arthur, who'd kept my house going in my absence, he'd been checking on it, making sure nothing went sideways, picked me up. We didn't talk much. He got me a coffee from a gas station somewhere along Route 20. It was terrible coffee. I drank all of it. I slept in my own bed that night for the first time in 26 months, and I woke up at 3 a.m. because I heard a noise, and my body didn't know I was safe yet. I lay there in the dark and I looked at the ceiling and I thought about the years. I was 66 years old. My wife was gone. I had missed 2 Christmases. I had missed my grandson's third and fourth birthdays. I had missed my grandson's third and fourth birthdays. I had missed things that don't come back. But I had the safe. Susan had filed the civil suit 3 weeks before my release. Fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, conversion of company assets, conspiracy. The letter of intent was Exhibit A. Phil Garrett's analysis was Exhibit A. The alibi documentation was Exhibit C. The suit named Daniel, named Sienna. Despite the divorce, she was still liable, and named the Columbus Investment Trust, which had moved forward with a partial transaction on the company during my incarceration. I want to be precise about what "they lost everything" means, because people use that phrase dramatically, and it often means less than it sounds. In Daniel's case, it meant this: the civil judgment against him reached 14 months after my release in a settlement under duress. His attorney advised him that going to trial would be worse. Was $1.2 million. That included the value of the assets that had been improperly transferred, damages for the harm to my reputation and lost income, and attorney's fees. Daniel did not have $1.2 million. He had a house in Shaker Heights that he'd bought with company money during the period of the fraud. That house was used to satisfy part of the judgment. He filed for personal bankruptcy 4 months after the settlement. In Sienna's case, the divorce had left her with some assets, and those were largely consumed by her own legal defense and her portion of the civil liability. Last I heard, she was working in property management, not ownership, not development, in a city I won't name, because I don't want to think about her anymore. The Columbus Investment Trust settled separately for $490,000, acknowledging that their due diligence should have caught the irregularities in the transaction. It largely did not affect their operations. I'm less satisfied about that piece. But Susan told me early on, you can spend your life being angry about the parts that didn't come out right, or you can take what you won and build something with it. I chose to build. Callaway Property Group no longer exists as it did. The brand was too damaged, too tied up in the legal proceedings. I let it go. What I have now is smaller, deliberately smaller. A handful of properties I selected carefully, managed simply, with no employees except a part-time bookkeeper named Ruth who has worked with me for 2 years, and who I trust because I don't trust easily anymore, and the fact that I trust her means something. My grandson's name is Oliver. He's 6 now. His mother, Daniel's ex-wife, a woman named Cheryl, who had nothing to do with any of this and who I feel tremendous sympathy for, she has been gracious about letting me be in his life. We have lunch together on Saturdays when she can manage it. He likes trucks and dinosaurs and a television program about a dog who solves mysteries, which I watch with him without complaint. Daniel and I have not spoken. I don't know if we ever will. I've thought about this more than I've thought about almost anything else in the past 2 years. What I've arrived at, and this is not a comfortable answer, but it's the honest one, is that forgiveness is something I'm working toward for my own sake, not his. I'm not there yet. I'm 67 years old, and I'm tired, and some mornings I wake up and the first thing I feel is anger. A clean, bright anger that I have to consciously set down before I can start my day. But I start my day. Every day I start my day. Every day I start my day. There's something I want to say to anyone reading this, who is older, who has built something over the course of a lifetime and handed it to someone who didn't deserve that trust. I want to say, the documents matter. The paper trail matters. Keep your originals. Keep them somewhere no one else knows about. Not because you should expect betrayal. I don't think you should live expecting that. But because the thing you built has value. And value needs to be protected. And I want to say this. I spent months in that facility feeling like time had been stolen from me. Years. And it had been. That's true, I'm not going to minimize it. But the days after my release, I started understanding something different. The time that was taken was gone. Yes, but the time ahead was not. I was 66 years old with 20 good years in front of me if I was lucky, and I could spend them being hollowed out by what happened. Or I could spend them on Oliver and Ruth and Arthur and the handful of properties I still cared about. I chose the properties and the people. The morning they released me, the sky was the color of old bone. I stood outside the gate and took a breath and thought about the drive home, and the safe still sitting behind its panel in my office wall, and the lawsuit already drafted and waiting. I thought about my grandson who had grown 2 years without me and who would, with luck, not remember these years at all. I nodded to Officer Briggs, and I walked. I've had a lot of time to think about how this all happened. More time than most people get, and more than I ever wanted. And what I keep coming back to isn't the verdict, or the cell, or even the moment I walked out of Elmwood. What I keep coming back to is a much quieter moment, sitting at my kitchen table on an ordinary Tuesday evening, looking at a folder I didn't open fast enough. That's the thing about betrayal from someone close to you. It doesn't arrive with a warning. It arrives wearing a familiar face. I spent 30 years building Callaway Property Group the slow, honest way. Every property, every deal, every handshake was backed by my actual word. I believed that if you built something with integrity, that integrity protected you, that the work itself was a kind of armor. What I didn't account for was that armor only protects you from the outside. It doesn't do much when the threat is already inside your house, already knows where you keep your keys. Daniel didn't become someone different overnight. I've had to accept that the version of him I trusted, the son I taught to read balance sheets, the young man I handed real responsibility to because I believed in him, that version had been quietly replaced by something else, something that looked at everything I'd built and saw, not a legacy to carry forward, but a resource to extract. Sienna accelerated it, I think, but the seed was already there. I just couldn't see it. What I've learned at 67 is that character reveals itself under pressure, not under comfort, not under success. Under pressure, when things got difficult, when the company needed patience and I needed honesty, Daniel made a different choice, and that choice set in motion a chain of consequences that no amount of legal maneuvering could ultimately stop. The $1.2 million judgment, the bankruptcy, the house in Shaker Heights liquidated to pay what he owed. None of it happened because I wanted revenge. It happened because actions accumulate. Every forged document, every false statement, every month he let me sit in that facility while he tried to sell my life's work. It all added up to something he eventually had to answer for. Consequences don't always come quickly. That's what frustrates people. That's what made those 108 days of early incarceration so hard. The feeling that wrongdoing was winning, that the system had gotten it backwards, that the people who lied were comfortable while the person who told the truth was in a cell. But I held on to one thing. The truth doesn't expire. The documents in that safe weren't getting weaker over time. Phil's notes weren't becoming less accurate. The alibi from that Tampa conference wasn't fading. The truth was just waiting, the way truth does, for the right moment and the right person to bring it forward. Susan Marsh was that person. I want to be clear about that. I did not get out of that situation alone. Resilience isn't stubbornness. It isn't just gritting your teeth and refusing to break. It's also knowing when to ask for help. When to trust someone new even after trust has cost you everything. When to hand the thread to someone better equipped to pull it. That took more courage than anything else I did. What I want to leave you with is this. The things you build honestly, you can defend honestly. Keep your records. Keep your originals. Know what you own and why you own it. But more than that, don't let what someone did to you become the whole story of who you are. I am not the man who was framed by his son. I'm the man who came home, had terrible gas station coffee with his oldest friend, and watched a television program about a mystery-solving dog with a 6-year-old who has no idea any of this happened. That's the version of this story I'm choosing to live in.